Steve Donnelly here. Now, all of you know me probably realize I love taking photographs of cars and bikes, right? And it can be a very challenging form of photography because it's hard to convey the drama, speed, and motion. Certainly, you can shoot at a very high shutter speed, and certainly I can freeze the motion, but a lot of people said to me, well, the car looks like it's just sitting on the track. It's just not moving. Well, the usual way around that's a technique called panning, where you set a slow shutter speed, well, usually between about 2/50th and a 500th, and actually track or follow your subject, right? Matching its speed, almost like you're shooting a video. And when they come right in front of you, press the shutter, and what that should result in is hopefully a completely sharp frozen subject with a blurred background. Now, this picture that I've got in front of you here shows Ryan Vickers, right, who is really getting big air at the mountain section at Cadwell Park. And I couldn't pan for a few reasons. First, it was in a very confined space. Secondly, with a dip in the road, they were literally right on top of me, before I could sort of react. And thirdly, it's also uphill, so I would literally been panning at a diagonal, which really wouldn't have worked very well. So the best thing I could do was shoot at a high shutter speed. In this case, it was about a 3,000th, and just fire away just as fast as my electronic shutter could carry me. And so this is not a bad picture at all. Obviously he's up in the air. But a nice little enhancement to do might be to have a little bit more blur within the tires and wheels. Okay. This technique that I'm going to show you now, I think can be pretty much done on every version of Adobe Photoshop and Photoshop Elements. Although in very old versions that don't have layer masks, it will be a little bit harder because you're going to be having to use the eraser tool, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make sure you've got your layers palette on screen. I have, right? If it's not there, press F7 in Photoshop and go to Window, Layers, and make sure that's ticked on in Elements. Right? Okay. I've already gone into Panel Options and made my thumbnails nice and big for this demonstration. So the first thing I want to do is make a duplicate copy of the background layer. And there's a simple keyboard shortcut for that, and that is either Command J on the Mac or Control J on the PC. And as you can see, we've got a new layer 1, which is a duplicate of the background, and I'm going to rename that. I don't need to, I'm only going to have 2 layers for this, but believe you me, if you have 6, 7, 8 layers and start moving one on top of another, renaming your layers is definitely a good idea. Okay. So there we have it. So the reason why I want to keep our background layer intact, you'll soon see why a little bit later on. So what I want to do now is make a selection of the 2 wheels. Okay. And for that, I'm going to do them one at a time, right? Whereas, believe you me, you can do it in a oneer if you're skilled, but I think it works a lot easier if you do one at a time. So I'm going to zoom right in on the front wheel, right? And so that is Command plus on the Mac, Control plus on the PC, and do that several times. So there's my hand tool. zoom out at long last. Okay. All right. So I'm going to make a selection of that. Now there's various selection tools over here, and the common one that we would use would be the rectangular marquee tool. Okay, but in this case, that's what you'd use for selecting skies and stuff like that. But what we want to do, if you right click on it, is pick the elliptical marquee. And I am going to try to select the whole of the wheel. It can be quite difficult to get just exactly what the shape you require. Again, that's not quite big enough. I want something that takes in all the wheel and about half of the tire. Try that one more time. Yep, that's not too bad at all. Right. Now, when you select anything, you always want to feather it. Okay. So, and you go into for to do that, you're going to select. Now, there's an option called feather. In this case, you could probably use feather, right? But I think it should always go into refine edge and feather, right? Because you can sort of see a preview of what you're going to get. Make that about 2 pixels. Go okay. Now, what we want to do now is put some blur on that, and there's a filter and blur. Now, there's several different types of blur, right? But the one we want is radial blur, right? And what we wanted to have that set at as spin. Quality best for it. It's a reasonably large image. Okay. Amount, the default about 10, 8 to 12 I find usually works reasonably well. And go spin. Now, some of you are I'm going to deselect that. Now, some of you are going to say that there's an obvious problem here, and yes, there is, but I'll address that a little bit later on. But at the meantime, I'm going to take the hand tool. I'm going to move to the back wheel and do the same thing. Marquee tool. Drag out the selection. That's nice. Just about halfway into the tire. And again, select refine edge, feather, and go about 2 pixels in this case. Your mileage may vary on your own images. Right. And then go up to filter, blur, radial blur. Again, make sure its blur method is set on spin. The quality is the best. Back. So there we have it. Deselect that, and I'm going to go back out to full screen. Now, a few of you are going to point out an obvious problem here, and that is that while the tires and the wheel rims spin, right, obviously the fairing, the suspension components, and the brake calipers do not. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase the blur layer from those components, okay, and allow the original sharp background layer to come through. And we do this using something called a layer mask, okay, and that's up on the little layers palette toolbar up on the top right here, and it's like a little square with a circle in the middle of it. And if I click that, add layer mask, bang, it puts up this white rectangle, which is the mask. Okay. Now, when you think about, there's two things to think about when you're using masks. Firstly, make sure you have the mask or the image selected depending on what you want to do, and make sure to check that, right? Okay, because you can think that you're painting on the mask when you're actually painting on the image and vice versa. Okay. So the other thing to do with masks is think about black hole, namely out in space. If there's black on the mask, it's a hole in it, and what is below will show through. So the moment I've got my colors set, foreground color is set for black. Okay, and if it's not set for black, if it's something other weird color, there's a little icon to the bottom left, set foreground and set default foreground and background colors. In our case, we want black. Right? Pick a brush, which we're going to be starting to paint onto the image. We'll paint onto the mask to be quite to be precise. Now, some people will say, well, where do you paint? That's all blurred. How are you ever going to get that accurate? Very simple. See where it says opacity in the top right hand corner? Pull that way down. Okay. So our brush at the moment is far too big, as you can see, and the quick way to reduce or increase your brush size is the left square brackets key to reduce, right square brackets key to increase. I'll bring that right down. I've the layer mask selected, so I'm going to start to paint onto the fairing, the suspension components, and the brake calipers. Just try and be as accurate as you can. Now, whilst I'm doing that, if you look over to the right, to the mask, you're going to see that there's little bits of black going on there. As I said before, black hole. Black is a hole in the mask. Right. See how we've done? I'm going to bring up the opacity. Yep. I don't think that's too bad. Maybe a little tiny bit more there. There you have it. You can bring up the opacity. And I want to zoom out to full screen. Is it not letting me? Yep. A little bit more blur there. And I'm going to do exactly the same technique again, only for the back tire. Again, Control plus or Command plus to zoom in. Hand tool lets me position on the screen. Again, select our brush, make sure black, and make sure we are painting on the mask. Drop our opacity. Now the chain is an interesting one because it obviously moves at quite a high speed, but it's not moving in a radial fashion. So we want to include the chain in this as well. Right, we'll bring that capacity up again, see what that looks like. Ooh, yeah, I can see I've missed a bit just there in the middle. Yeah. Right, there we go. So Command 0 or Control 0 zooms right out again. So there we have it. A little bit more motion blur in the wheels. Not massive amount, but just a little. It's worth more better on the front wheel than the rear, but it's. I think it helps a little bit. So obviously, we then to save your image out, if you save it as a JPEG, you go into Layer and Flatten Image, which crunches everything into one new background layer. File, Save As, and save your image to wherever you want. Okay, well, hope you learned something from that, and thanks for listening.